One of the concepts of my business and my newsletter when it comes to property is maximum utilization of land. Hi, I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead. Let's talk about the maximum utilization of land and a concept that has been implemented for generations to preserve land, to improve it, and to create great abundance and natural resources. So first off, there's a lot of folks who own large tracts of land that were either inherited in their family or they bought for investment purposes or they've otherwise obtained and pretty much own outright but have held for years. The land doesn't do much. It maybe has scrub pines on it, maybe has natural forests. You might visit it 2 or 3 times a year for hunting trips, family outings, or other types of activities. This is well within what we talk about in Prosperity Homestead. Having this homestead that provides for your family, it gives you the recreational value, it gives you the natural beauty, and it gives you long-term benefits. Here's the challenge though. Many of these properties are neglected, they have erosion problems, they have trees that are overgrown and past their prime, they have natural spaces that left to their own devices actually degrade, rather than managed resources that would perhaps involve the Department of Natural Resources or involve forestry professionals or involve ecologists. There's missed opportunities on these lands. So one model I've seen and I'd like to introduce to you is where these lands are put into some kind of conservatory or some kind of conservation plan. And this is really part of that land management. So you might be thinking, well, I have this rural land, a few hundred acres in the middle of a small town, and I go there once or twice a year to go hunting, but over the years, the turkey or the deer have been fewer and fewer. What if that land was managed in such a way to create natural habitat for the deer, for the bear, for the any of the game animals that you're hunting? This happens very often in duck preservation. Large basins are constructed on otherwise vacant land to create natural habitat with wild rice and edibles to not only attract the ducks, but to provide a habitat where the ducks can maintain maximum health. Now, to maintain populations, the properties are open through managed hunting, both through either state programs or through private programs. But ultimately, the land becomes more than it was originally. It just isn't attractive land or wild wilderness. It is a managed ecosystem that over time improves itself. Now, you have to understand here, just because humans are managing it doesn't mean it improves the land. You have to have a certain ecological and native understanding of what good land is. It's not just that you're cutting the trees every 30 years and you're cashing out the crop and replanting trees. It's what's the right natural blend of forest for that particular land, that particular elevation, that particular land layout and water availability. And what usually ends up happening is more of a permanent ecology design rather than a simple set it and forget it. And so what happens is, for example, you could put the land in a charitable remainder trust, and that trustee, a nonprofit organization, and there's a number of organizations we can put you in touch with, but that organization will actually manage the land to make it grow maximum value for native wildlife. So native plants instead of imported forests. It's going to be wildlife habitat and patches and animal routes, not only access routes via trails and such, but routes for the animals. How is the migration across this land for native birds? What's the geography? What is the erosion and remediation that's necessary to correct issues on the land? These donors will put this land into these trusts, and they will ultimately tour the land. They not only become owners, and some people might think, well, if I'm donating the land, I lose my benefit of ownership. Well, actually, they shift from owners to stewards of that property, and sometimes even sit on the board of the nonprofit, but you still get some use of the land through tours. But here's the challenge. I've known a number of large properties that are shared among families, and one family member just does everything right. They maintain the roads and access to the property. They maintain the cabin. Every time they use the cabin, it's in great condition. But it's that one cousin of yours who's running four-wheelers up and down the hills and causing erosion and causing issues. None of that can happen because the land is actually under some kind of stewardship where it has regular inspections, it has regular maintenance, it has a design plan. Now, that doesn't restrict usage of the land because as the utility value of the land increases over time, you're going to have more and more opportunities to use that land or other land in this network of managed properties that will get you the satisfaction that you were looking for without the liability, the frustration, and concerns. And liability is a big issue. You have this giant piece of farmland that someone wanders onto while hunting and then hurts themselves, and then they turn around and sue you. Or you have the liability of poaching or illegal activity. There was one farm that I was when we grew up in St. Mary's County. I walk through the woods, I keep walking, and then I find a giant crop of weed. Now, the farmer was an Amish man. He didn't know there was weed growing out on his property. And eventually that could have been a problem for the community. And it was resolved by simply alerting law enforcement of it being there. But ultimately, do you have those types of issues? That piece of land that you go to, that rural land, does it have issues that you're not aware of that could compromise your financial position, that could compromise your ability to benefit from that land over time? In other cases, I've heard of land being taken because it was being illegally farmed or illegally timbered. And the owner of the land didn't even know. The owner had a number of pieces of land and did not know the land was being used in such a way. And when the meth lab or the illegal cocaine facility or the illegal storage of there, they actually ended up with a long legal process and did not get their land back because it was seized in a DEA-related raid. Now, let's put all that aside. Let's put aside that liability of human, and let's look at the ownership retention and the concept of managing the land rather than just owning the land, and then becoming a steward of that land to improve its bounty over time. So why do you own the land in the first place? Did you inherit the property? Is it a family homestead? Does it still have a family cemetery? Those reasons are very important. But if you're not managing the land properly, then every time you go back to visit the family plot, the homestead, you're going to be reminded of what it was rather than what it could be. Now, Reynolds Homestead is an example of what it could be. Reynolds Homestead is a property here in the Henry County region of Virginia that was previously owned by R.J. Reynolds and their family as part of the tobacco crops and the tobacco activity. Now, that's being managed by a university. So there are a number of organizations that can manage your land for you, but it's being managed by a university. It has a nice research center there. It has a conferencing center. It also has areas that are used for different types of festivals. So that land could have been just a line item on somebody's balance sheet, but it would have not increased in value standing alone. Now, you could invest money and resources to increase its value, but then you'd have to hire staff to manage it. Well, their relationship with the school, Virginia Tech, actually provides resources to manage the land, plots of the land, provides access and availability to the land to the larger community, which generates revenue for the land. So the land isn't just sitting there costing you property tax. It actually is improving itself. And because there are regular stewards on property, whether it's a property manager or a caretaker, the land is better controlled and managed. So there isn't the opportunity for somebody to wander out onto the property and get hurt, or wander out onto the property and grow an illegal crop that could compromise the property. It's actually managed. The Biltmore estate is another example. That building could have gone into ruins, as many mansions and large estate properties have across the United States. But the family structured in such a way so that the Biltmore estate and the winery and the whole experience of that 128-room mansion could be shared with the public through a means to preserve the legacy. Now, if you think the family loses access or benefit from the property, you're grossly mistaken. There's a new trend going on called instead of homesteading, people are actually buying chateaus and mansions and restoring them, and then finding logical ways to improve the utility of the land in such a way that it pays for the luxury of the property. So whether it's a winery, whether it's a bed and breakfast, or whether it's a natural preserve or a small farm, there are ways to transform idle land into useful and beneficial, sometimes even cash flow, sometimes tax deductions, but more importantly, to do it in an ecologically sound way that makes the land management a sustainable function, both in improving the value of the land, but also helping your family get more out of the land, more of what they want. That legacy, the new memories, the new experiences, the story. There's one property owner that I was working with, and the key thing that he wanted was the legacy to continue, so that no matter what happens with this piece of land, the story of the land, the story of his people will continue. So we went into the history and we started building up public relations campaigns around the reason why. We created historical documents, or we didn't create the historical documents. We simply documented them in such a way that people can be aware of these nuances and these, lost history. Another example is the Germania Foundation, which I'm a member of. My family came here in 1714, and the original homestead, the General Spotswood's location, is actually now land under management through a historical society. And they're restoring buildings. When I was growing up, Point Lookout, Virginia, we did a lot of restoration of the Friends of Point Lookout, and we worked with the State Park Service and actually restored an area there. And we had many, many nights of camping and enjoying this state park because we were volunteering work as a nonprofit to restore Fort Lincoln. And the memories, the experiences, and all that was retained, even though we didn't own the land. It was owned by the federal government. It was owned by the state government. So let me wrap this concept up for you so you can tangibly understand what I'm sharing here. And then if you have additional questions, I'll be happy to answer them. If you've got a large plot of land, agricultural land, a land that is otherwise not being used, understand the reasons why you hold that land. Now, I'm not encouraging you to sell the land, because what we talk about here is prosperity, is about creating abundance by conserving and managing the resources that we have, becoming good stewards. So if that land's just sitting idle, ask yourself the question, what would you like that land to be doing for you? Do you want to use it for hunting? Do you want to use it for family reunions? Do you want to use it to preserve a legacy of your forefathers or your grandparents? Then we want to look at, what's the plan? Do you have a written plan to manage that property? Now, what happens a lot of times is folks put together the written plan and they realize that it really is a lot of work. You may have to hire a caretaker. You may have to work with forestry professionals. You may have to have the land surveyed periodically. You may have to have, in some cases, security to monitor the land to prevent folks from using it in unauthorized ways. And this, on paper, costs you nothing. And that's why we're constantly talking about design plans. But on paper, this costs you nothing, but the implementation part. How do you achieve the implementation with a minimal outlay of money? Because again, the land could just sit there, but it will erode, it will have challenges, but it won't go away. Land is land. It'll be here forever. But what if that land could go to the next level? What if it was like a property developer friend of mine, the lake house that they went to several times a year, and family members honeymooned there. the young children had experiences with their grandparents there and sitting on the porch and overlooking the lake. That didn't just magically happen. One generation built the house, another generation built the gazebo and the deck, and another generation supplied the boats. It became a multi-generational experience in a story, in a bond that really lifted up people. But it wasn't just magically happening. It was a plan. It was a written plan. So again, what do you want from the property? Why do you hold the property? What could the property be doing for you? What's your plan for the property? What kind of resources do you need? How can you make the land itself pay for these resources and covers? In some cases, it's simply you need a tax deduction. I've seen a lot of land donated to organizations under charitable remainder trusts or under kind of a legacy program with a university. And again, we can get you a list. But maybe you don't want to lose the usage of the land while you're alive to get a tax benefit or an estate managed tax reduction when you're dead. Well, put that in your plan. Draw that out in your plan. And then finally, what is the execution? I've looked at a number of properties with clients, for example, where they wanted to downsize. So they're already in a $1 million, $2 million house in a city somewhere, and they want to move out to the country and downsize. And they really think because of the economy that they'd like to have less money in the game. They want to have their money invested in different ways. So we looked at, for example, agricultural land that had leases on the land. Now, the house was $1.2 million, but it had a small caretaker cottage on the property. And what they wanted to do is actually rent the house out because it had a good proximity to Washington, D.C., and they wanted to live in the caretaker cottage and enjoy that cottage life. Now, of course, when they have a family reunion and they want to bring 30 or 40 people, they can put them in the $1.5 million house, the $1.2 million house, and they can maintain that house. But the majority of the year, executives in transition would be staying in the house, and they'd be operating it as a bed and breakfast. Now, what this did for them was took what normally, so their $2 million house they moved out of, is a house that they live in, a primary residence. It costs them money. And they turned that same experience and lifestyle into a tax beneficial situation because now there's a rental property, which all the capital improvements are handled differently in a rental property. Since they lived on the property and actively managed the land, they actually had a active investment interest in the land. So their costs are offset, but also they wanted to have more events. So they actually ended up with 4 events a year where they would open the land up for little farm days or weddings or actual other events that the person renting the property really didn't care because they were renting only the house. The rest of the land had hay contracts, it had cattle contracts, it had other contracts on the land. And so their business became they were in a retirement position. Their business became the management and stewardship of the land, yet it didn't influence their income streams. It did not change their lifestyle. And in fact, their net earnings significantly increased. Now, I know I've covered a lot of different models here, from charitable remainder trusts to putting land under conservatory to how you use the land, bed and breakfast or market farm, to different types of property, large agricultural properties with no homes on them, farm properties that would have a small home, or even hunting land that might only have a small, tiny cabin. What you choose is really up to you. And so if you'd like to talk specifically about your goals and objectives with your large parcels of land, 50 to 100, 300, 400 acres, actually here there's 750 acres that's being looked at for this type of project. Let's sit down and go over the details of what you want. Let's draft up a high-level plan of what are your available options. And then let's look at how we can get this kind of thing put together. Now, I'm not necessarily going to do it for you. I only accept a small number of private clients, but I can make referrals to you and connect you with individuals who can help make possible this dream you have with the land. And maybe you don't even have a dream with the land. You even forgot you had it. How can we transform that? There's a lot of options available, and of course, we can adapt to economic situations. We can adapt to the near-term needs of your family. But ultimately, what is the legacy that you'd like to create 100 years from now? What are people going to think when they drive by that land? What are they going to see? What are your family members or children going to experience? All of that can be put together. Now, this is not an estate plan. This is not a financial plan. This is more on the permanent agriculture or the permanent ecology side. How do we utilize the land in its most natural form to create the most abundance? But again, if you visit me at www.prosperityhomestead.org, we can sit down with you and go over the specifics of your property. If you're in the Henry County, Martinsville area, I'd be happy to go visit and tour your property. And I can also introduce you to a number of experts in the area of land management who can help you cash flow your property or otherwise improve its viability and benefit to you in the future. I want to thank you for listening. Again, I'm Justin Hitt, a permaculture design consultant. I do business analyst work and consulting around sustainability and risk management. And I'd be happy to spend a little bit of time on the phone chatting with you about your situation. If you don't have an immediate need, I do encourage you to subscribe to this podcast, Prosperity Homestead, or visit me at www.prosperityhomestead.org. You'll find all my contact information, and you'll find additional resources that help you transform the land you have, the small farm, the homestead, the estate, into the lifestyle and luxury that you desire, and do it in a way that is sustainable, ecologically sound, and grows the value of the land over time. Thanks for listening.